Well, good evening, everybody. It's a cold 7:30 or slightly after. I'm Charles Matthew, your chairman for the first seminar of two run by Nature Recovery Network. Their purpose is to conserve and enhance biodiversity. Today, we wish to embrace councillors, parish councils, and local enthusiasm to this. And it is with great to this end. And it is with great satisfaction in this world of growth and development to greet over 100 of you to explore what you can do to enhance the role of nature and ensure the environment becomes healthier and toxic free. The first speaker is Catriona Bass, who is the principal of Longmead Local Wildlife Site with Kevin Martin, to explain how the seminar will run, and then put the first talk entitled A Network of People for Nature Recovery. I will pass over to Nikki Chambers.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Charles. Good evening. Amazing to see 76 people on here. Just a few mechanics and housekeeping from me for the session. The network's all about connection, and we really want to make this as interactive as we possibly can within the bounds of having lots of people on the webinar. So if you have a question, your questions for the speakers are very, very welcome. And if you can use the Q&A button on the bottom right-hand side of your screen to put any questions in there, then we'll try and pick those up and either present them as to the speakers as we go along or for at the end. So questions in the Q&A box, please. As I say, it's all about connecting. So if you do want to make yourself known to other people on the webinar, then also just pop your name and your parish into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to connect you to others, potentially others in your area or with common interests. We'd also really be interested to know what else you want to hear about. We've been really surprised and delighted to have the level of interest that we've had. So if obviously there's something has resonated with you, and if there are other topics or issues or content that you would be interested to hear about, then just pop that into the Q&A button as well, and we will collate those and take that back. So the Q&A Q&A box is the place to be. In terms of the next webinar, Charles said that it's a series. The second one is scheduled for the 24th of March. So get that in your diary now. It'll be a similar process. And it's going to be super practical around managing hedges, trees and verges for people and for wildlife. We've got Robert Crocker, who farms in Freeland, on the bill, and his brilliant hedgerow projects, which have been taken up by Countryfile. We've got the tree surgeon, Reg Harris, who looks after the veteran oaks in Sherwood Forests. That's a job I wouldn't mind. And we have me talking about a potential contractor accreditation scheme, which is possibly not as romantic, but the sort of thing that we might need to do if we're going to bring change. And we're also hoping to get the company who's developed a verge biomass harvester to scoop up all the clippings from verges, which is a bit of a challenge, and you need to do that if you want to maintain to let the verges bloom. So that's the 24th of March. Put it in your diary now. So do pop things in the Q&A, and now I'm going to hand over to Katrina, who's certainly one of the key architects of the Ensham Nature Recovery process. Katrina, the floor's yours.
Thank you very much. I have to say network, not process, because network is the critical thing. So I'm Katrina. We have a local wildlife site in Ensham, which we've been managing for the last 20 years. And this idea of creating a network of people for nature recovery grew out of thinking about these pronouncements that have come from the UN and elsewhere about the need for transformative change if we're going to not lose the battle very soon for saving nature. So I'm going to go and share my screen now and perhaps stop my video because that might make there we are. Can everybody see that? So this notion that we have to come up with transformative change was reiterated last week by in the Dasgupta biodiversity review that was commissioned by the UK government. Of course, transformative change implies everything from the global to the personal, and coming in together as joined up communities can only be really a very small part of it. Nevertheless, I think the record of our efforts at preserving nature over the last few decades, we have to probably agree it's been dismal. And if we look at the statistics, I think it's clear that we need a structural change in the way we do things. So, So here are a few statistics, and they're kind of quite surprising. We have more members of environmental organizations in the UK than in any other country in Europe. And yet we remain one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, 189 out of 218. So basically that's 29 from bottom. And then if we go locally, only 4% of Oxfordshire retains any special value for wildlife. But locally also, in the 20 years that we've been managing Longmead, we've seen the extraordinary passion and concern of people for the decline in nature in our stunning Upper Thames floodplain. In Ensham, there's Green Tea, Ensham Society, Rotary Club, all been supporting nature recovery interventions for at least 40 years. And many other people volunteering for our environmental organizations, people increasing biodiversity in their back gardens. But in the end, all our efforts are focused on a tiny area. You know, most of us have handkerchief gardens, and the environmental organizations own a mere 2% of land in the UK. So the question is, how do we scale up nature recovery efforts to meet the challenges today? Given on the one hand, this massive public concern, and on the other, problems of access to land, and of course the finite resources of environmental organizations to support projects outside their own sites over the long term. Well, in the autumn of 2019, we got together with a group of councillors and community members on our old floodplain meadow to look at how you might create a local network of people that would connect up and support individuals, community groups, local businesses, councillors, all living in the same place. And so therefore, in theory, having a long-term commitment to it. So we had the idea that if you connected up individuals and groups, you might arrive at a whole that was greater than the sum of the parts. And therefore, importantly, create a kind of critical mass that would draw in more people and bring influence and funding. So what we discussed was a kind of bottom-up approach that connects enthusiasts with ideas to local experts, all living in the same place, which in theory might build over time a cadre not only of committed people, but also skilled people, both in the community and in the parish councils. So our hope was that this might overcome conventional problems, both of sustainability, which we see in environmental projects all the time, but also this network organizational structure might allow a kind of scalability, unlike a kind of the typical pyramid of most community organizations where you have to kind of prioritize because you have to go through the core group or the board or whatever it is. And then most importantly, in connecting enthusiasm with expertise at the local level, we kind of hope that the network will lead to well-informed interventions for nature recovery over the long term. So this is what it looks like. This is actually, I mean, it's a kind of, it's generic, but this is actually reflects the groups that have emerged in Ensham's Nature Recovery Network over the last just over a year since we've been operating. So, what have we got here? So we've got the local factory inviting members of the recovery network to help them increase the biodiversity on their site and have workshops with the members. We've got the primary schools plans to create workshops for them. Local experts will come on to that. Anyway, so these are real members in the group. And the basic idea is a kind of version of Charity Begins at Home. Instead of each of us getting into our cars and driving to a nature reserve to volunteer, we create projects on our doorstep. And of course, enjoy the kind of primroses or whatever it is every time you stop, get out of your house, rather than getting into your car again and driving off to see what you did last year on the wildlife site. This is a workshop organised by Ensham's Peace Oak with wood donated by the local sawmill. And that's what we found, that the businesses and the local charities are all super eager to donate to projects that are happening in their street. How did we start? So we started with a satellite map up in Ensham's Market Garden shop. And they've been fantastic, as have Evenlow DIY. All the shops in the community have really kind of joined in. So we invited people to put stickers on the map for their favorite nature places, but also importantly, proposals of where they might like to see some biodiversity gain, either in their own gardens or in public places. And that might be wildflowers, trees, or ponds. So by the inaugural meeting, where Longmead, Green Tea and Ensham Society came together, we had a mass of suggestions. Oops, this is it. A very dark, wet night last January. Of course, at the moment, we can't, if anybody's starting up now, it's slightly more tricky, the kind of person to person, but hopefully soon everybody else will be able to do something like this. So, experts offering to lead surveys, enthusiasts of all kinds, eager to self-organize, local champions, which is what we've sort of started to call people living on particular streets who are eager to canvass their neighbors to do something, interested councillors keen to collaborate, and then importantly, the existing community groups willing to work together to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. So I just want to take one example, 1 year on now. We've got lots of experience, lots of projects. And I just want to take this example of the water quality surveys, which were set up by Lucy, who you can see there, who's also running in the background the webinar. And I think it's a lovely example. And it's completely of our moment. Water quality, Ensham's been dogged by Thames Water trucks, Stand Lake is also Stanton Harcourt. So this is how it started. Lucy got excited about monitoring the water around Ensham. Lucy's a chemist by training, which is jolly useful. And then Charles Matthew, who is also here and introduced us, came in with funding for professional equipment so that we could get started. Natural England also is contributing to the project. After that, Lucy developed a plan to work with Bartholomew School and the primary school to do ponding, dipping, i.e. kind of monitor invertebrates, which is another way of testing water quality. This, of course, is thwarted by COVID at the moment, but she did manage to get into the primary school for their science week and take some samples and do some testing of phosphates and nitrates with the school. So hopefully we can pick that up again in the summer when things get better. Then now, in fact, her son Laurie is taking on the sampling and testing for his Duke of Edinburgh award. Then in the autumn, things really escalated because Lucy wrote a report for the newsletter. And from that, Southleigh, Hanborough, Cumnor all wrote in saying, could we start testing our water too? And at the same time, another Ensham resident, Martin Hardenbrook, came in and said he could run invertebrate surveys once lockdown starts. The next thing that happened was that Lucy Kennery, who runs the Lower Windrush project, contacted and said, why don't we extend it to their area, and let's meet up and talk about extending the scope of surveys. Then Stanton Harcourt Parish Council invited us to a presentation by WASP, the Windrush Against Sewage Pollution. And finally, on Tuesday, we had our first meeting of this wider network to look at how we might collaborate. And then kind of in the nick of time, Southleigh, whose water we've been testing since October, I can't quite remember when, emailed to say, they wanted to test some more sites, and Rita Sawrey Wardwoods is happy to test. She's a biochemist and she's happy to test Southleigh's water. So we quickly sent her the link, the Zoom link, and she joined the meeting. And so the result of that meeting is that WASP is lending Southleigh equipment so that they can scale up and test their own water. Lucy's sending WASP the registration number of all the lorries, the Thames Water lorries that have been bringing their sewage to Ensham pumping station, which have been collected by somebody else in Ensham. And WASP is documenting the movements of Thames Water lorries around the country transporting raw sewage. Lucy's also used our data in correspondence with the MP Robert Courts, and Charles has been talking at the County Council and on the BBC about sewage. So to me, this is a kind of perfect example of a kind of joined up community at its best. Individuals, NGOs, and local government all living in the same area, each having something to bring to the table and connecting up, importantly, in a kind of flat network. There's no hierarchy here to make it happen. It's nimble because it doesn't have to gather large forces or wait for board meetings, and it's easily expandable. So that's the kind of idea, example. What have we learned? Get all the help you can get. So really important in doing anything is understanding that any restoration needs to be coupled by scientific knowledge and best practice. Gathering experts to support the community and the parish council. So these are the experts in the Ensham network. Some of them you might recognize from the pictures on your screen. But importantly, experts are not just the professionals in the village, but really, there's a huge amount of expertise amongst people, long-term residents, local farmers, experienced bird watchers. The thing that we've really noticed is that most people are very reluctant to acknowledge their expertise. They say they might help, but they don't know very much. And that's the biggest obstacle actually we've come across so far in the year that we've getting people to acknowledge that they're helpful. This is facilitating botanical surveys. We restored an acre of the playing fields in June. This is Alison Maldal leading a community survey workshop. Look before you leap. Of course, we all know these various blunders last year and then this year with trees being planted in an old, in a peat bog. Ensham has its own example of this with as most of us know, the willow coppice that was planted in the floodplain meadow, which of course has only 4 square miles left in the country, the size of Heathrow Airport. Bringing in outside expertise. So we've understood that having a kind of hub is very helpful to the environmental organisations to kind of connect in with the communities. This is Neil, who you'll hear later, doing a slow worm survey. Building a local database and map, also very helpful, so that everybody knows where the primroses are coming up. Or, for example, in this garden survey, somebody had a sparrowhawk in their garden, and then a week later somebody, well, in fact Nikki videoed the sparrowhawk having a fight with a magpie. And of course the conventional model is that one as an individual records for a national NGO, and then you lose that sort of connectivity across the community. Adopting an incremental approach, so verge, increasing the biodiversity of verges. We surveyed those to find the areas that had the best diversity in the first place, but also importantly, where there weren't houses backing onto them, so that those who are not so enthusiastic about all this weren't affronted. Sharing stories, very obvious. Having a strategy. I think it's really important that that everyone can read the new streetscape. So this is Christchurch Meadows, who used wildflowers, designed their borders effectively with wildflowers. And so you can do something quite formal with native species, which of course has the double effect of increasing habitat for native animals, but also, you know, looks formal. So this is annuals, formal planting with annuals. So it doesn't need to look scruffy for those of you who like their lawns neat and tidy. Again, this is Kirtlington, where mown areas through the wildflowers make it clear that it's planned. Having a working strategy would be helpful to have an A in it, but anyway. So really important to put in effective strategies for collaboration between the parish councils and the community. This may require structural changes, the subcommittee, inviting local experts to join full meetings as consultants rather than just talking in the public 5 minutes at the beginning of meetings. Working out a strategy for consultation. This was quite an interesting one for us. You know, what do you consult on and what don't you consult on? Grass management, obviously, parish councils don't usually consult on. But do you need to? Would you need to consult for neighbours wanting to restore the verge outside their houses, for the whole community or just those living beside them? So those are all interesting things we had to consider. What does NIMBYism look like in a village context? Then also adopting language that facilitates change. So grass management. Well, if one talked about biodiversity maintenance, it suddenly has a whole different kind of feel for it. Wilding, very contentious, very wonderful, but in an urban setting, probably it risks alienating a large section of the community who might see it as neglect. Carbon storage, this is a big bee in my bonnet. All diverse habitats store carbon, not only trees. So just think of a mosaic of habitats. Beware of the squeaky wheel. Parish councils, I think, are very used to a handful of people complaining about neglect. And in the context where most people don't engage with their parish council and they very rarely get positive feedback, I think we all need to be aware of of getting more involved and giving them credit when they do wonderful things and not leaving it to the squeaky wheels, and parish councils learning not to respond to the squeaky wheels. I think the new environment bill might be quite helpful when it eventually comes in this respect, as as it does give public bodies a statutory requirement not only to conserve but to enhance biodiversity. So that's a good excuse, anybody in a parish council who needs a reason to go back to the Stripy Lawn Brigade. So it's a great opportunity in the face of increasing development over which the parish council is largely powerless. Biodiversity is one area that it can help deliver real and lasting change for and with the community. And so this is just what we are urged by the UN Council of in 2019. It's not too late to make a difference. And we've had fantastic support over the last year from all these people. So thanks very much. And I'm going to pass on to Neil, who is an Ensham resident, a super professional, CEO of the Witchwood Project, and a great networker. Neil.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Katrina. I'm not sure it was all deserved, but thank you anyway. I will share my own screen in a moment when Katrina has removed hers. But firstly, can I just say, you know, it's nice to be invited along tonight. It's great to see so many people participating and joining in. And it's always a pleasure to hear what Katrina has to say about the work that she does over at Longmead. So I have been asked if I could provide my thoughts on looking at our local green spaces in a different way. And I've also been asked if I could, you know, go back to the beginning and explain the actual scale of the ecological crisis that we are facing at the moment. So I'm happy to do that, but it does mean that I'm going to depress everybody first. But I think if you're going to solve a big weighty problem, it often helps to fully understand what you're actually trying to tackle. So I think it is helpful to have a look at the way that we've modified our own environment. Hopefully I can, you know, give you some reasons for optimism at the end as well. So if I can just share my screen. There we go. Is that working okay, Nikki? Grand. Okay. So what I thought I would do first really is to start with a bit of a thought exercise. So this is something which works pretty well in a village hall with a kind of knowledgeable but non-professional audience. How well it's going to work when I can't really read the room from my kitchen table, we will see. But, you know, firstly, what do you think about that? How does it make you feel? So this is clearance of Amazon rainforest pretty recently, you know, in the last 4 or 5 years. I could have used much more emotive pictures. We've all seen the ones of sort of raging jungle fires, and there are some pretty horrible pictures of, you know, wisps of smoke still rising as the first cattle come upon you. But, you know, it upsets us. But, you know, should it? Is it our business? Should the international community do something about that? As I say, how does it make you feel? I know if I was a jaguar, I wouldn't be very comfortable there anymore. And then that one, you know, same thing, different part of the world. So this is clearance of Indonesian forests of palm oil. I know palm oil is quite an emotive subject and people have strong views on it. But again, you know, should we be meddling in the affairs of other parts of the world? And I put this one up because it's quite interesting, because this is Sumatra, and in the 50 years I've been alive, Sumatra has gone from an almost entirely forested island, apart from a bit of subsistence agriculture, to being half deforested. So this sort of stuff has happened across half of that entire island. And of course, if it carries on, then there will be no more orangutans, no more Sumatran rhinos. And these are big, charismatic megafauna. You know, if we can't get exercised about stopping the extinction of creatures like that, you know, what hope have we got of worrying about the greater ecological crisis? So again, you know, how does that make you feel? And then to bring it back a little bit closer to home, this is Slapton Lee National Nature Reserve. So this, you know, this is one of our biggest and proudest nature reserves in the country. This is where the Field Studies Council are based. It's not too far from where I did my first degree, so I know this part of the world well. But, you know, when you show people this picture and say, right, now what do you see? How do you feel about this? You know, most people go to Devon because it's bucolic and it's the countryside and they immerse themselves in nature in their holiday. But, you know, I think you could look at it in an entirely different way. So this is Slapton Lea here. This is just it's basically the lagoon and this little bit of fringing habitat. But look at the world around it. You know, I personally don't see a huge amount of difference between that and the last two photographs. And then to come even closer to home, this is Leafield. So this is the parish and the village of Leafield, right in the heart of the old Wychwood, right in the heart of West Oxfordshire. So here's the village. And looking at the surrounding landscape, I mean, to me, that makes me wince. You know, there's almost no biomass there. Sure, it's green, but it's, you know, it's agricultural green. If you kind of know how to read a landscape, this is quite interesting, because you find often in these situations these little tiny higgledy-piggledy fields very close to the village are the ones that would have been cleared first in the sort of 12th, 13th, 14th century, when we were just starting to establish this kind of, you know, sedentary agriculture around here. And these little fields usually exist near the villages because they're, you know, quaint, pretty, and you want a nice view from the village. As you go a bit further out, you start to see bigger fields. These are probably, you know, fields that were consolidated under the Enclosures Act in the mid-1800s. And then when you get even further away from the village, where nobody minds quite so much, you start to get these almost American-style prairies. And this is kind of indicative of really big clearances, grubbing up of hedgerows, you know, the beginning of use of pesticides and all sorts of other other approaches to make agriculture more efficient, which happened after the Second World War. So, you know, when I ask local groups, what does this make you feel? You know, when you're driving or walking through Leafield, you feel way out in the country. You feel like it's rural, you feel like it's remote, you feel like you're steeped in nature. But, you know, as an ecologist, I just see that very, very differently. But then, of course, if you start to draw attention and shine a light on the really, really intense modifications that we've made to our landscape, you start to draw criticism that you are banging the drum for rewilding and you would like it all returned to primal forest with bears wandering around. I don't think that's a realistic criticism. You know, we have to face facts that we live in a very populated part of the country. We have established this system of land management for a very, very long time, and lots of people have an economic interest in the way the land is managed. So to come and make huge sweeping changes, no matter how much some people might like it, is not realistic, and it's not the way to get people on board. However, as Katrina said in her talk, in Oxfordshire, I mean, Oxfordshire's particularly squeezed. We have about 2% of our land cover is SSSI, maybe twice as much. That 4% is of value for wildlife in some other respects. 80% of it is agricultural land. About 10% is under the built environment. So out of that 10%, which isn't farmland, which isn't our towns and our villages, only 4%, you know, less than half of that leftover land is actually of any use for biodiversity. So even if you doubled that, that would be 8%. Is that too much to ask? You would barely notice it in a landscape like this, but you would actually be doubling the amount of space you had for biodiversity. So that's the way we kind of need to look at, you know, at being realistic about the way we've modified our landscape. We're only going to reverse some of the damage so far, but unless we do something to actually push, you know, the favour just a little bit back towards all the other creatures rather than our own ones, then we're not going to make a difference, I don't think. And then this is what you get with that kind of heavy modification. So the State of Nature report is really good, actually. There's lots of very technical information, but lots of accessible information in there too. It's been through a couple of iterations now, but it demonstrates quite compellingly that, you know, since the 70s, again, in my lifetime, more than half of our species have, you know, experienced population declines. 15% are said to be threatened with fairly imminent extinction now, and we've already lost more than 130 species in that time. So, you know, quite clear downward trend in the state of our nature. But also, since the financial crash, you know, public expenditure on biodiversity as a proportion of our GDP has fallen again, you know, by 40-odd%. So, you know, how seriously are we taking it? You know, how much resource are we going to actually put behind trying to do some of these, you know, nature recovery projects which are being mooted? And then there's a really, the latest iteration of this has started to pick up an interesting statistic. So a few years ago, there was a kind of pretty well accepted metric for trying to work out how depleted a country was in terms of its biodiversity. So it's published in Nature. It's called the Biodiversity Intactness Index. And it basically says, with fairly compelling evidence, that if the biodiversity intactness index falls below 90%, it probably means we're crossing a threshold where ecosystems will no longer reliably meet society's needs. So you can interpret that any way you want, but it is starting to foretell the collapse of nature and everything that will follow on from it and affect us. The global average of countries is 85% intact at the moment. So, you know, that's below the kind of warning level. Britain is 81. And as Katrina has already said, that makes us 189th best out of 218 countries which have been assessed. So, you know, that's close to world beating in all the wrong ways, basically. So there's a lot that we have to do. And this is well worth looking at as well. You get your quick Google search, you'll find this. So this is a report produced by Wild Oxfordshire a few years ago. I was one of a group of people on the steering group that kind of, you know, tried to drag this into life. It's really well researched. You know, most of the environmental professionals and amateur ecologists in the county have contributed their experience and data to this. It's just a good read, even if, you know, to a lay audience, there's some very, very interesting stuff in there, and it will give you a good background on where we actually are in our county. And it's remarkably similar to the national one. So, you know, the trends of decline in the same kind of groups of species that are happening in Oxfordshire as they are across the rest of the country. And there's a list of key findings and key actions in the report. I didn't bother putting them all up, but the number one finding was that in recent history, you know, so since those clearances and modifications that we've made since the Second World War, we've lost a lot of species-rich grassland. And, you know, I know that's a subject which is dear to Katrina's heart. She does some amazing restorations work down on the Thames. But we are still, you know, famous for our grassland resource. Oxfordshire's got one of the best, you know, collections, if you like, of species-rich lowland grasslands in the country. And we've only got a fraction of it left. So the fact that we've destroyed most of it and we're still considered to be quite a good place for diverse grassland is not something to be really proud of. And the key action, amongst lots of others, including some very good things about engaging communities and landowners, is that we urgently need to create larger and more connected areas of habitat. And it's as simple as that. You know, if you go back to looking at those aerials, either here in Britain or around the world, we've just got to stop squeezing places where all the other creatures live quite so hard, I think. So, you know, that's the scale of the problem. What is it that we're going to do about it? So you could bluntly say there are two ways to tackle the ecological crisis. The first way is to wait for top-down diktats. So you wait for central government to actually come up with a plan and help all of us, both professionals and interested citizens alike, to actually try to shift the balance back a little bit in the favour of nature. So the current approach is to start developing nature recovery networks. This is an area for action which comes out of DEFRA's 25-year plan. Someone's already mentioned the Environment Bill, which is not really stuttering its way through Parliament. So it's been delayed 3 times now due to more pressing issues. Yeah, I kind of get that, but also how important is it if you keep sort of kicking it into the long grass time after time? But, you know, it could be promising. You have to play the game. And I have been part of, as so many people have been part of having some input into a nature recovery network and a strategy for Oxfordshire. So the map on the left is, you know, kind of core areas for nature conservation and recovery zones. Again, this is on the internet on Wild Oxfordshire's website. It's, if I'm honest, a 3rd or 4th iteration of information that we already knew. You know, conservationists in the county know what needs to be done. This is largely based on the old conservation target areas. It brings in some new data and it gives, it is an improvement, but I suppose I'm saying that we kind of know what it is that we need to do. I sat in a meeting recently where a Natural England representative told us, whoa, Oxfordshire, slow down. You know, we haven't come up with all the parameters yet. We're still doing trials, and maybe sometime next year we'll tell you, you know, how to go about creating your nature recovery network. So there is some frustration that we seem to be always ahead of the game and waiting for national initiatives to catch up. And that's the way it is, you know. governments of all stripes, both here and abroad, tend to deal with thorny issues by having a review or an inquiry, or maybe if you're lucky, producing a white paper, and then we'll have a plan which is going to make everything great in 20 or 30 years time, and then there'll be a set of very ambitious targets. And then 30 years later, you know, as we've seen recently with, you know, the international biodiversity targets, not a single one has been met. There is a long history of these things never actually delivering what they're meant to do. And of course, 20 or 25 years later, the administration that set those targets and ought to be culpable is long gone. So I've become a little bit cynical about the efficacy of some of the government's attempts to you know, reverse the declines of nature, purely because I've seen this cycle 2 or 3 times now in my career. However, you know, this is what we have to work with. It could be really good. It could be brilliant if it's pushed in the right direction. So, you know, we need to work really hard to make sure that this delivers everything we want it to. Of course, the other option, and the way that you get a lot of societal change on big issues, is from the bottom up. So, you know, I would agree with everything Katrina said about the importance of the network and how it can be fleet-footed and it doesn't require endless amounts of bureaucracy. You know, I went to the first meeting and I was very impressed from the sidelines, seeing how many people came out. I could see the activity going on in the village, and my involvement in it really came about because Katrina and her group had put in a funding application to do some grassland restoration across several sites, 5 or 6 across the village, and I was asked to review it for the grants awarder. And, you know, I thought it was a really brilliant project, but one of the sites was the churchyard in the centre of the village. The plan, of course, was to scarify it and knock it about a bit and then restore the grassland by putting in additional species by seed. And it clearly looked to me like it, you know, is the kind of place where you would expect to find a few protected reptiles. So that was flagged up. As a result, we did a reptile survey. It's the kind of thing I used to do in the distant past, and it interested lots of people. So all the guys that, you know, worked for Churchyard came along. We had 10 or 12 people helping. More people came in, and then the Peace Oak allotments at the other side of the village also got interested. So certainly, out of reviewing a grant application, we've got this kind of mobilization of people out there trying to understand where all of our protected reptiles are in the village. So sure enough, that we found slow worms in the Churchyard site, and we found them in Peace Oak as well. And whether or not, you know, you're kind of into reptiles, it's pretty cool to have one of, you know, the world's 40 legless lizards living right in the centre of your village, behind the village square. So, you know, the kind of network approach really allows things to burgeon. And personally, as a result of this, I found out there's a lovely chap called Don Reed living in the village, who it turns out 30 years ago, when I was running captive breeding programs at Bristol Zoo, he was running the ploughshare tortoise conservation program in Madagascar. So we met up, and I had the best technical nerdy reptile chat that I've had in many, many years, you know. So it has all sorts of benefits. I just put this up. You've seen these pictures from Katrina. This is really impressive, I think. This is my favorite thing that's been done in the village over the course of the last year. So those of you that don't know the village, this is a kind of dog leg of our playing fields. So the rest of the playing fields are football pitches and, you know, cricket nets and stuff. But there's this long dog leg, which is probably about half a hectare, which isn't used for any sport. It makes its way down towards a small kind of woodland, wetland area, but it's always closely mown, just like all of the other playing fields are. When you think about it, why do you need to do that? Why does the grass need to be 1 inch high in an area where it's not being used for recreation, where it's not an amenity grassland? So the local group, with the council's support, harrowed it. So basically it was roughed up and scuffed up a bit, and then they used quite a reliable and scientific technique of using green hay from a much more diverse grassland. So the hay was cut, quickly taken to the site, chopped up, thrown on, and then rolled in. And it's very effective. And I personally, I'm just really impressed that, you know, a village can do something on this scale. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes up actually in springtime. It could be quite something. And this is later in the year. We all spent a Saturday morning planting snake's head fritillary bulbs in the sort of soggier, wetter areas. So, you know, it's gone from being green grass that nobody really needed to hopefully something that's going to be colourful. And it's actually, you know, strategically, it's between a permanently wet drainage ditch with lots of scrub cover and then the Chilbrook stream on the other side with a tree belt down it. So potentially this could be transformative for invertebrates in that part of the village. I just think it's very impressive. And then, of course, what else can you do? So we've looked at knowledge sharing and surveying and, you know, grassland restoration. Lots of things you can do. You know, there are many prescriptions that you could do in a small parish which are really going to change things for wildlife. And of course, you could argue that making, you know, small incremental changes isn't going to tackle those really big problems that we looked at the start, but they add up, they mount up. You know, collectively, you start to find your environment becomes a little bit more permeable to all those other creatures, and people start to take notice. And if you get a groundswell of people that are actually helping to improve biodiversity on their parish, politicians notice. And if you can kind of from the ground up meet those top-down recovery plans halfway, then, you know, you're on your way to winning, I think. A word of caution, I don't like to see loads of trees planted. I think I really believe in the right tree in the right place for the right reason mantra. I know people often see a bit of empty ground and think, let's plant lots and lots of trees on it, but it doesn't create very good habitat for a while. If you want to plant trees, you know, strategically, trees in the right place are very useful, but you know, one of the most important resources we've got out there in our countryside is our hedgerows. You know, they could or they should be nature's highways. So, you know, making connections in those defunct gappy hedgerows or using the opportunity to plant to actually fill gaps and thicken them is a really good thing to do. I was really pleased to hear that you've got one of our trustees, Robert Crocker, at the next webinar. He's the expert in this sort of thing, so I won't dig a hole for myself. But you know, we should be looking at our hedgerow networks across our parishes, and also in between. We could be creating big highways across the landscape if we approach them in a little bit more imaginative way. And then I just bang the drum for ponds. Ponds are brilliant. They get colonized really quickly by all sorts of invertebrates and amphibians. And they capture, you know, often when you speak to local people, some people really care about the biodiversity crisis and they want more wildlife. Some people really care about the climate crisis and they want to do something to tackle carbon sequestration. It's the same thing, you know. It's that heavy modification of the landscape, which is you know, created the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. So they're both the same side, two sides of the same coin. So people usually reach for trees, thinking trees are going to be the answer in terms of storing carbon. But there's very good research now which shows that, you know, newly built ponds like this, because of the rate that they accrete and deposit organic material, they far outstrip even woodlands. You know, and admittedly they're very small, but if we had lots and lots of them scattered across our landscape, as we used to do before that agricultural intensification, we could sequester an awful lot of carbon. People, you know, don't always do the critical thinking perhaps of what is the best habitat enhancement to put in this part of the village or this part of the parish. And then the final thing I would say, the last drum I want to bang is for not being too afraid of untidiness. So this is a piece of land which is, I'm sorry, this is Ensham again for those that don't know it, but this is on the kind of hinterland between the village and then the open countryside proper. It's round the back of the industrial park. And again, if you know how to read a landscape, you can tell that once upon a time this was, you know, low-grade agricultural land. You could see the relics of old grazing infrastructure, fences and stuff. It's been land banked. I'm kind of guessing a lot of this, but I've seen this sort of thing many times. It's clearly been land banked. It's been taken out of production. Someone had the hope that one day they could put it forward for development. So no one's done anything to it. You know, it's just been left to its own devices, I would guess, for maybe 10 years, perhaps. So nobody's mown the grasslands, nobody's grazed it with any animals. It hasn't done much. It's gone rank and tussocky. It's not going to win any prizes for most diverse grassland, but then if you are hunting kestrel or a barn owl, and I've seen both over these fields, then you don't care very much about that because the mice and the voles don't care either. A couple of times I've seen the back end of a grass snake disappearing into a clump, and I know these are not brilliant pictures because they're shot in winter, but if you can see half of the fields, for whatever reason, is now rapidly succeeding through to the scrub phase. So you've got loads and loads of hawthorn, bit of dog rose, bit of bramble coming through. So when you close up, it looks like this. You've got lots and lots of young, spiky, nasty hawthorn, about head height or so. And this is the kind of thing that, you know, those kind of vocal minority that don't like untidiness would find this tatty, you know, unpleasant to look at. But it's got perfectly good desire lines where people have walked over and over again. So there are kind of ready-made paths through here where the scrub doesn't grow, the grass doesn't grow. But in between, you're starting to get these more and more dense stands of hawthorn. And if you walk through the village, if you pass through these fields, these sort of no man's land fields, there's another much bigger one just across the way, which is going to be built on soon. This one isn't. This will be retained as public open space. But the other one's the same. It's starting to go through those successional stages. And this, you know, this is nature recovery happening on its own without people planning it, without people getting stuck in. And I'm not saying that this is the answer everywhere. I think, you know, we need our amenity spaces to be better, you know, better manicured, for want of a better word, for all sorts of reasons. But if we can just have some of these scruffy areas on the edges of our villages, it will make the world a difference. Because when you walk through here in the springtime, this is where you hear all the bird song. It's noisy, you know, it's chattery. And then when you cross over a small road into the countryside proper, if you like, you can hear the silence ringing in your ears when you get out into those kind of big agricultural prairies. There's no noise. And then when you walk back into the village, you hear the birds again. And in the when I took these pictures over the past week or so, there have been flocks of 60, 70, maybe 80 meadow pipits hunkering down, as they tend to do. They move south in the winter and they find places like this. You know, the people who will build over this will have dismissed it as having, you know, negligible ecological value. That's the way the system works, and it will have been dismissed. But it's gone from being probably absolutely hammered, compacted, closely grazed sheep pasture into something which is now succeeding through, is attracting birds, is attracting reptiles, small mammals, raptors, and then, you know, wintering meadow pipits. So there is a place for this. You know, abandonment of land is not always the answer. I don't even want to get drawn into the whole rewilding thing because I think the language is not helpful. But it's just as much a part of the toolkit as planting trees or digging ponds, in my opinion. And then this is the final picture. You know, this if you like, is nature recovery in action. So this is that same field. This is the most gnarly, thickest bit. So here you've got bramble and dog rose and spiky things everywhere. These are nature's tree guards. You know, right here in the middle, you've got an ash tree coming up through, and there are 3 or 4 species of trees actually making it, you know, coming through where they're protected from browsing animals in these thick areas. You know, no plastic tree guards, no stake, no plastic, you know, ties. It's just a tree deciding where it wants to be, basically. And I think we have to understand that we can't always make the decisions about how we're going to recover nature. Sometimes it's quite capable of doing it on its own. So all parishes have a bit of land like this. I'm sure you've all seen it. And I think as part of, you know, again, we need development, we need progress, but I think if we're a bit more creative about how we manage our mitigation process and our biodiversity net gain, there's a place for these areas, these rough areas.
Thank you very much, Neil.
You're welcome.
Fantastic.
So yeah, thank you for your kind attention. I'll have a look at the questions, and if I can answer any, then I will. But my final job then is to hand over to the next speaker, who is Jane McBean of Chesham Town Council.
Thank you
Jane,
very
all
much.
yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, if Katrina scared you and Neil depressed you, then I am the doom and gloom and death, because I am from a town council. And to add to it, I've snuck across the border from Buckinghamshire, and I'm a complete interloper in Oxfordshire, so I can only apologise. But yes, as Neil said, so I am actually a Buckinghamshire county councillor, but I'm also a Chesham town councillor. So Chesham is the third largest town in Buckinghamshire. We've got a population of about 22,500 people and growing. So we do have some very unique problems. We have a wonderful chalk stream, the River Chess, that runs through, and it is battered constantly by highways runoff, death of 1,000 cuts, a sewage treatment plant that pours very badly treated sewage out on an almost daily basis at the moment. We sit in a valley, so we have more water in the wrong place and don't know what to do with it, not enough in the chalk stream half the year. And we are a very built up, very old urban conurbation. So we are in the process of creating a new neighbourhood plan for the town. We're looking at major development, major regeneration in the town centre. But all of that agenda makes it even more important that we actually look at our local biodiversity and we do everything we can to try and improve what we're doing. So, you know, what we're doing is very, very, very small and grassroots compared to some of the projects you've seen today. But as Neil pointed out, we've all got a duty to do exactly, you know, everything we can and try and get these projects up and running. So I shall share my screen. So, so this is pretty much the urban perspective. So, I mean, really kind of prime examples of what we're trying to do. We have got, if this will work, there we go. We've got 4 major projects that have been, well, 3 have been running for a little while and 1 is brand new, a dreaded rewilding project. Sorry, Neil. But the first one is our Berkhamsted Field Community Meadow. So we've got 2 hectares of open space, which runs right next to one of the main routes into the town. And a few years ago, well, it's had a long history. So obviously we are Zone 9 outside London, and we have Chesham Station, which is the very end of the Metropolitan line. And this piece of land started life as a piece of land that was purchased in order to expand the Metropolitan Railway line, and then it all fell away. So it was designated, it was dedicated by the town council as a public open space in 1955. It had our freemen cultivated it and grazed livestock on it for a very long time. But in 2008, we ceased to have livestock on there. And it has, for the last few years, has been managed as a chalk grassland habitat. So we've been working with the Chesham District Natural History Society to give us a bit of assistance. And we've spent 12 years actively trying to manage this and improve it as a very diverse site. And we changed our management approach about 10 years ago. We changed the way we cut the grass. We make sure the cuttings are taken away to keep to kind of improve the nutrient levels, keep them poor. And also it's been a fantastic education tool for people locally, because we now have very active groups that go out and monitor all kinds of species. We have all kinds of orchids that have started to grow in the last few years in particular. And we now have a very active local group who learned how to scythe. So you walk into the 3rd largest town in Buck, see people out in the fields with scythes again. So so it's a big success story for us locally, and shows what you can do right next to a very dense urban setting. And then another project. So in 2016, Buckinghamshire County Council, as it was then, decided to devolve down control and management of our 30-mile-per-hour highways verges. And we have quite a lot of these. So the town council grasped the opportunity, and we have been managing our highways verges. We were approached by a local resident who encouraged us to change the way these were managed. We heard it from Neil. They were very manicured, you know, well, they were supposed to be cut 6 times a year. We were lucky if it got done 2 or 3 times a year. And actually we made a key change in 2017, and we introduced 6 kind of trial projects with our verges. And I'm glad to say now we've got 14 active sites, and actually they've become a mainstay of some very large areas of highways verge in and around the town. the key thing for us was about how we manage that land, and it was actually making specific changes to the way we cut the grass, actually removing the risings. We have a parks team. We had to invest in some new machinery because usually it's cut and run and leave everything blowing around in an urban setting, but we now remove the risings, and we've seen a huge increase in invertebrates, in insects, in the species of plant life that we see. And it is literally right there in the middle of an urban setting where you can walk up a local hill of grassland. One of our new projects is a project called Community. Because we are an urban setting, we have seen the decimation of trees within our urban setting. And whilst I know, you know, some people are a bit reticent about it's not all about tree planting, well, actually for us in Chesham, it's quite an important part of what we do. So this whole project is about having residents nominate sites within their residential roads where they would actually like to see trees being put back in place. So we've planted about 135 trees in the last, I suppose, 8 months or so, in 2 growing seasons. We have literally transformed some of our old avenues that have been completely denuded of any trees are now once again tree-lined avenues. We've deliberately chosen more mature specimens that are a good kind of 7 feet tall so that they're a little more hardy. We have lovely men in white vans who like to drive over whips, so we decided early days that that was not going to cut it really, and we needed something a bit more robust. But the main thing for us is it's about education. It's about getting families out as well to help us. So they are nominating sites, but they're also volunteering to come out to help with planting parties. And then for the first couple of years of the tree's life, they do actually adopt a tree, as it were, to water it and take care of it and keep an eye on it. So we will be continuing with that. We have plenty more urban streets that are in need of not just trees, but shrubs as well. We have an A road that carves its way right through the centre of the town. It's probably not ideal for tree planting, but what we've recognised recently is something that Neil was saying, and it's all about shrubs and hedges can be just as important as planting trees. So actually we're encouraging some of our front gardens. People are now actually digging up their concrete slabs and their shingle and planting some more shrubs, which is important because we're in a valley and that area is actually an air quality management area, and we are starting to see a difference to the level of nitrates difference. Now, Neil won't like this one, so he'll have to brace himself, but we are looking at a rewilding project. We have a very large green multi-purpose park, Lowndes Park, in the centre of the town. In 2013, we established a small community orchard up at the top of the park with about 40 fruit trees, all of which is picked, distributed amongst families in the town, and we have a local fruit pressing firm. So good old Chesham apple juice and pear juice is very popular. But once you get past the manicured part of the park and once you get past the community orchard, we have a very large area, which it's pretty low quality grassland. But this whole area in its original format was a forest, and it's this area here, the spur off to the left. We've got a huge secondary school here with a lovely multi-use pitch made of all kinds of noxious materials that we all kind of shudder at these days, unfortunately, but it's great for the kids. You know, we have to take the wins where we can in an urban setting. But just below it is this area. It sits on a south-facing slope. We're already starting to see a little bit of natural rewilding where trees have naturally seeded themselves and some shrubs. But we are literally going to council next Monday night to look at how we can kind of help that along. It's very popular with dog walkers, so we've got some natural pathways that have been created by people moving through the spaces. So we're going to try and preserve those, and we are absolutely anti the forestry approach of lovely rows of saplings, all neat like soldiers. My dad was an army man and used to plant daisies as if they were on parade, and his plants in the garden. So we are totally against that, and we're looking at a very natural plan where we actually do some random planting. We use some native species, and we make the whole thing, you know, try to encourage it to be a much more natural progression. So this is a very different project for us because we are an urban setting. Community is all about quick, easy wins of getting some trees into the urban setting. But this is a kind of cross-generational project where it will be younger whips that go in. It'll be a mix of trees and shrubs, but it will be very much a longer term project. And my kids and hopefully my grandchildren will see the long-term benefits. So those are just kind of 4 of the projects that we're trying to bring to bear within the urban setting. It has not been easy, that's for sure. Try introducing kind of wildflower verges in the middle of a town. We do have a random resident with one verge that no matter how many times we leave it to grow, he literally goes out in the middle of the night and gets his lawnmower out and cuts it. And we have finally given up and just gone, okay, fine, we'll leave it 10 years. He will have moved on in one way or another and we'll have another go. The next generation will try. So you have to kind of see what you can do. You have to suck it and see what works. And occasionally you have to admit defeat and move on. One of the things we have done in the last year is we've actually carried out specifically an eco audit. So as a town council, we don't just provide public services. We also own the local theatre and we own an open air swimming pool. And we have a very diverse parks team who do a lot of work for surrounding parish councils. So we felt it was really important to establish what was happening with all of our buildings, all of our operations. And if we're going to kind of lecture our residents and our businesses to do better, then we thought it was really important that we led the way by actually establishing where we were and what improvements we need to do to actually lead by example. So we have published that. So it's out on our website. We've created a traffic light system. We have a whole spreadsheet of actions that we need to deliver over the next few years. And it's all there on public display so that we can be held to account and that people can see what progress we're making. As I said, we do need to adapt. There are some things that are going to change. We've had to invest in different equipment and we've had to invest in our people, but actually it's all proved to be for the greater good. I remember a difficult conversation with our head of park saying, no, can't use trusty old Billy the lawnmower anymore. We're going to have a new one that actually picks the grass cuttings up. And there was lots of sucking of lemons. And then 3 weeks later, he was looking through all kinds of catalogues at all these lovely gadgets he could get his hand on and found this wonderful lawnmower that actually we've got a big lake, we've got a pond, Scotto's Pond, and a lot of unwelcome geese. And he came in very excited. I found a lawnmower that will scoop the geese poop as I go. So, you know, sometimes you've got to bring people on the journey and it's amazing what will actually excite some of our die-hard traditionalists. Training, again, it's been a great opportunity with the urban tree planting. We've had to completely retrain our parks team to actually work on and near the highways, because that is something that Transport for Bucks would usually do as part of council. But what it's done is it's opened our staff up to whole new skills. So now instead of sitting in the depot for 4 months in the winter, they're much more proactive. They've brought forward a plan to actually be trained in all kinds of other mechanical and electrical works. And we now have a fully operational winter workshop. And we have managed to bring all of our maintenance work in-house this winter for the first time. So that has reduced our carbon footprint. It's reduced cost to the taxpayer because we're doing a lot of work in-house, but it's also reinvigorated our workforce. It's taught them new skills, it's personal development journey for them. So it's very good in a lot of ways. And then one of the other things we've done is the kind of swap shop idea, certain services or equipment that we can't buy in, then we've gone foraging around the parish councils and certainly at the depot of the county council. And we're doing all kinds of kind of swap shop, whether it's equipment or whether it's people. So we're managing to send our apprentices, we've got a couple of apprentices, we're getting them experience within a much bigger, more experienced kind of depot team. which is really good for their development. And in return, we're then swiping some equipment so that we can get certain jobs done. So it's a great way of kind of bartering and having that collaboration. Yes, how do we do this all? So it's very much what exactly what Neil and Katrina have said. Local aspirations. For us, it was really important to understand what our residents wanted. You do not want to introduce a project and have 22,500 people decide they don't like it and flood the town hall that they can walk into 5 days a week and inundate it with very disgruntled people holding pitchforks. So it is really important to kind of talk to your parish and your residents and your neighbours and work together. And then when you start those conversations, you start uncovering the local knowledge. You know, we found we had someone who'd worked for the Environment Agency for 40 years. I'd known him for about 15 of them and I never knew. And suddenly he's leading a massive project for us. One inside tip is don't retire, because the second you retire, you are more busy than you've ever been in your entire life, especially if people find out what you're good at. So again, local expertise. And it doesn't have to be around wildlife. We've got all kinds of people who are handling management side projects, risk assessments and all those dreaded things, the accounting of it, that nobody really wants the job, but there are some people that are fired up by things like that. The other thing, inform and persuade. Tell everybody. Number of times my husband rolls his eyes and walks away because I'm standing in the queue at Waitrose chatting to a random stranger about how I'm covered in mud because I was out planting trees. And literally 2 days later, we get a community form delivered to the town hall and she's got all of her neighbours excited and suddenly we've got 10 more trees to plant. So it's really important to just share all that knowledge, all that information and all that enthusiasm. And then inside champions, yes, if you can find a councillor or a senior highways technician and drag them kicking and screaming, which is how I first got dragged in 6 years ago, then it's really important to kind of grab hold of those people, especially if they're very loud and pushy like me. So the time consuming bit, which is the bit we all hate, planning. I can't say enough about planning, especially if it is a community kind of homegrown project. Someone said, oh, I've got a silly question. There are no silly questions. They're the ones that you really have to ask. And certainly over the last year or so, it has been very difficult. We've tried our very best in tier regulations and full lockdowns to find clever ways to actually still be able to get out and do that important work, monitoring sites and getting trees and shrubs into the ground. The other thing I would say is start small. You know, if you've got an ambition to rewild or you know, build a massive pond, break it down into manageable chunks. Otherwise, it can very quickly become overwhelming. I've got a very enthusiastic resident who wants to go out and plant 1,000 whips in a week. And I've had to kind of rein him in and say, no, we'll break it down into, you know, 4 or 5 small areas and it will take a few months, but it will be all the better for doing it that way and you won't have a nervous breakdown. Build relationships and in brackets flirt. Yes, I am a blonde and I am a girl and I have been known to deploy that tactic. And it's amazing how it will work with depot chiefs and highways staff in particular. If you are really, really keen to convert a highway verge into something more natural, then do deploy the gentle conversation with a burly man in an orange jacket with a clipboard. It never ceases to fail. Just in case, so what we try to do is all of our volunteer projects, we are very supportive of them at the town hall, and what we try to do is pull them under the town council umbrella, because it does make sure that we have several £1 million worth of public liability insurance. It means that people are covered. We also have a fantastic policy officer who loves risk assessments, which is very helpful for these projects. And also dreaded elfin safety, you can't avoid it, you have to embrace it. So using the insurance and using risk assessments, it's amazing all the little things that you never think of, and then you start to write a risk assessment and suddenly you realise you haven't got enough spades. So they do have their place, they drive us all mad, but they can be useful. So funding is another area. So obviously the obvious one is council budgets. You know, we set the precept every year, but obviously budgets are increasingly under pressure. There are always charitable donations, but they don't always have to be money. So we have a local branch of Wix, and we have a care home that needed a new sensory garden built. So we went to Wickes to see if we could get a bit of a discount, and about an hour later we'd sweet talked the manager and all of the staff to giving up a weekend, and they essentially came and built the entire sensory garden in a weekend. And in the end they had so much fun that Wickes donated all of the materials for free. So it's not just about money, it's about time and effort and materials and all kinds of things. Again, spreading the word, sharing your ambitions. We've got a road, very, very long horseshoe road, not a single tree in sight. We had one resident who wanted to plant a tree and about 60 neighbours who all poo-pooed it and said, no, no, no. So I think we're about 2/3 of the way of turning it into a tree-lined avenue, because we literally planted the first tree and within 10 minutes we had neighbours coming out going, oh, what are you doing? Oh, what's that? Oh, that looks nice. Oh, can I have one outside my house now? So I can't emphasize enough just sharing what you're doing and bringing people on that journey. Corporate guilt trip is a new one for us, and we are starting to kind of work the magic. Big companies especially, but all kinds of companies are suddenly waking up to corporate social responsibility. So go and talk to your local businesses, encourage them to get their staff out to donate some money or some time, or volunteer their staff, which is always a favourite for the managing director, but it can make a huge difference to your local project. Funding as well. So obviously we've got these slightly bigger issues of community infrastructure levy. So obviously SIL money is a fairly new thing, and I suspect central government in their glorious way are about to tinker with it and change it, just as we're all just kind of grappling with how it works. It is really important to talk to your local planning authority. SIL does give you the benefit of having money that is fed directly back into a community that has to suffer some development. So it's really important to identify what your local community is entitled to through the planning process and making sure that you maximise those opportunities. And then again, biodiversity offsetting. We're on a very steep learning curve in Bucks. I sit on the Natural Environment Partnership on behalf of the County Council. So we are literally about to take papers to Cabinet to agree a compensation scheme for developments that cannot deliver adequate biodiversity. So it's a very interesting time, and we are kind of girding our loins for some big battles with some big developers about how they're actually going to come up with the goods, make a big difference on their sites, because biodiversity offsetting is all well and good, but actually we'd rather not have the damage done and lose those natural spaces in the first place. And I think building and development needs to be sensitive to that. But in the instant that we actually do lose some of those settings, and it's really important that we hold large developers in particular to account, and even small developers, and make sure that we try to secure gains for projects in other areas. So that's it from me. Whistle stop tour, because I know time is marching on. So I hope that's helped. It's a very different perspective to the one I think that Neil and Katrina have brought. But my details are there. So if anyone is from a parish council and you want to learn more about any of the projects we've done in an urban setting, or have any questions, then feel free to contact me and let me know. Right, I shall stop sharing, and I think, am I handing back to Nikki?
You are actually. I think we're handing back to Charles to move on to Chris. So I'm very conscious that we are running quite short of time.
We are. I'll go straight on to our two further speakers. Making Change Happen by Councillor Chris Church. Over to you. And if I could say, there is probably 7 minutes available.
I will endeavour to be prompt and rapid.
Thank you.
I'm hoping people see this. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm here. I'm speaking in a personal capacity. I am chair of the North Hinksey Parish Council Environment and Wellbeing Committee, But my observations are partly about the parish council, and they also come from my work as Director of Community Environment Associates. I've been working with community groups on environmental issues for a great many years. And it's an interesting, I'm going to look at the relationship between people, their parish council, and their environment. North Hinksey Parish Council, we're 13 people. It was a pretty traditional parish council. And let's be aware, some parish councils are doing great things on the environment. Some are doing much less. Some areas have got good local active community groups. Others don't have them at all. Oxfordshire has probably got more environmental groups per head of population than anywhere else, thanks to the Community Action Groups network, but there's still a lot of room. So North Hinksey has become more proactive and was, as I said, as it says here, possibly the first one to declare a climate emergency. Part of that is that only 4 members out of 13 have been on for more than 8 years. And I'd like to look at tell you the story of how change has happened. If you go back, when I moved back to Oxford, where I was born in 2012, and I looked in at the parish council, I have to say it looked a bit slow moving and reactive. Planning applications would come in and be dealt with, but there wasn't a lot going on, and it did seem quite argumentative. Then along came, and anyone who lives west of Oxfordshire may know the Botley area because the buses and the roads go through us. There was plans for a huge redevelopment of our local shopping centre and the local sheltered housing to bring in a superstore and cinema. Despite an awful lot of building opposition, the parish council didn't oppose it, stepped back. They at that point had strong links to the district council who were all in favour, and there was a declaration it was a done deal. Similarly, they'd not got really behind a successful Save the Library campaign. That meant that people looked elsewhere. And out of that came a community group, which I was involved in, Westway Community Concern. And instantly the different ways of working became fairly clear. 650 people turned out. You can see them all there waving red balloons down the bottom when they surrounded the site that was due to be demolished. And the community approach wasn't about debates and discussion. It was about join us, big meetings. Also coming up with a positive vision, what Botley wants, and raising 20,000. While, it has to be said, the parish council rather sat on the sidelines. The Doric proposals were thrown out in 2014. The area has been redeveloped, but on a rather smaller scale. It's still maybe too big. But so we had a different process, but that led to some change. Local action meets parish council. The Westway Community Concern had built the skills of many people, and a lot more people were interested in how things worked in their community. I joined the parish council. I was put up to stand at a by-election, but I got a pretty frosty reception. But a year later, there was a whole ranch of elections and 8 people, you can see their photos there, most of them bringing in rather different and non-traditional parish council approach. And they were all elected, which gave the parish council a majority. And one of the first things done was to adopt a set of working objectives. This is what we will do, which rather moved beyond the traditional parish council way of working. Maybe lots of people here, their parish councils do have those objectives, but ours certainly didn't. And we took on the job of developing the neighbourhood plan. So more people joined the councillors for our community group in the 2019 elections, and we seem to be getting public support. There are still arguments, of course, and disagreements over ways forward, but that's where we are. And into that came the environment. And in our case, the climate and environment agenda. It took a while to get this on board. Traditionally, people didn't see the parish council as a place to go to do stuff on the environment. But the neighbourhood plan introduced issues. And there was growing public concern, of course, but attempts to get an environmental group going for various reasons hadn't really taken off. So the parish council was stepping up. One of the things we had to do was understand the links between the traditional, where did the grass mowing get dealt with? That was recreation and amenities. What was the Environment Committee going to do? Something rather different. And then suddenly all our councils are talking climate emergency. Every council, larger council in Oxfordshire has a climate target. And we developed our climate ecology plan. I don't have a lot of time to talk about it because I want to look at the lessons from this. We have done the tree planting. We would support the goal of a lot of groups across Oxfordshire of doubling tree cover by 2045. We organised the Big Green Day. You can see the poster there. And you can see that it did involve the Association for Botley Communities as well, a community group. So what are the lessons learned to share tonight? Well, firstly, what does a parish council do? A traditional parish council, I feel, and I've worked with quite a few, is very focused on being a representative. People get elected onto it. It has tight procedures, formalised agendas. It's hard to sit back at a parish council and discuss new ideas because we've got a very full agenda to get through. The parish council has advantages, money, and it's recognised as a formal responsibility. And it has legal roles and responsibilities, which a lot of people are very focused on. The community side is coming from a very different place. Anyone who wants to get involved can turn up and do so. It's participative. Somebody from a parish council said, who do you lot represent? Well, the answer is actually we're the people who stepped up. And of course, we were able to work in a very different way, much more room for innovation. It's fascinating to see how Chesham has been really innovative. And I'd love to know how they got that into a very tight agenda. Maybe they created enough space. Of course, the community groups don't have the budgets, but they can raise money. And some are recognised by local councils, districts, but very few, of course, have actual responsibilities. And I think this is the reason why in some cases there are still, and I think that's why I'm here tonight, tensions between the traditional parish councils and the more, dare I say it, go-ahead community groups. But, big but, both care often passionately about where they live. Some want to focus on preserving what we've got. Others want new approaches. And that can often be a tension in itself. And it's not necessarily the parish council that's focusing on preserving. So how do we find the common ground? We have to talk. Jane mentioned the need for constant dialogue. And I think there has been a problem that some parish councils function largely around parish council meetings and not the casual discussions in and around the supermarket. Both face problems, and I can't really talk parish councils without looking at last week's little episodes from Handforth. Domination by a few personalities. Now in a community group, it's a bit different. If that kind of stuff happens, no one comes to the next meeting. People walk away. But in a parish council, it can continue. The budget's still there. The meetings are set a year in advance. The clerk's working. We have to find ways to resolve our problems. And my message, I think, is that parish councils can be and should be at the heart of the community. But a lot of people still see them as of less relevance than the community groups. But the parish councils can make things happen if they want to. They need to be open to all. They need to be listening. And I think what we're seeing now, with the desire to tackle the climate emergency and the ecological emergency, is more and more people saying, we want to see change happen in our areas. It is a new situation. And I think we need our parish councils and the Oxford Association of Local Councils to all step up and say, okay, we can play a real part in tackling the environmental crisis. That's really all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Church. That's very kind. And we'll pass on to Councillor Ross Macken. Over to you.
Thanks, Charles. I'll just load my screen up here. Presentation mode. Okay, so I recognise we're a little bit over, so I'll move through the material as quickly as I can. So introduce myself first. My name is Ross Macken. I'm an Ensham Parish Councillor, and I've been involved with the Ensham Nature Recovery Network since late in 2019. And we've, this last year, so 2020, we've executed a lot of projects, many of which, the ones that the Parish Council have been involved in, Katrina's touched on, Neil's spoken a little bit about already. So I'm not going to go through the projects. What I'm going to do today is give you a perspective from a parish councillor, how this kind of thing works, what you can do as a councillor, and I'm looking at what's gone well and what's gone, or where we had some challenges and where we could have done things better or differently another time. So let's start with the good stuff first and talk about what went well. So the first thing was, it's just the huge level of interest that we had in Ensham in doing something to improve biodiversity and to help mitigate climate change. I attended the first meeting that was at the beginning of last year that Katrina talked about. It was fantastic. I don't know how many people were there, maybe 200 people. And afterwards, many of them put their names down as volunteers. So that's the next part of this that really surprised me, was as we started to do projects and do work, we had huge numbers of people really very willing to give up time to help do these projects. And to give you an example, we did one weekend where we did a number of different activities across the weekend, but we had around 40 people turning up across that weekend to get involved. The other thing that we very rapidly discovered, and there's a number of them on the presentation tonight, is that the level of expertise that we've got in the village is also amazing. So we've got people who lead wildlife organisations like Neil. We've got experts, some in very specialist fields. We've simply got enthusiasts, people who've studied bird life in Ensham for years and know everything there is to know about the birds that come and go in Ensham across the year. We've got people who have been guerrilla planting trees for 4 decades around the village. We've got skilled gardeners, people like the Ensham Society who have stepped in and helped with things like winter maintenance. We've got people who are willing to help with tree maintenance. So we've got this great expertise. We just got to find it and tap into it. Me personally, I have met more people in the village in the last year taking part in these projects. So it's a great way to meet people. You have a group of volunteers doing something in a field or on a verge or in a part of the park. Other people come up and ask you what's going on, and then they want to join in. So the next time you seek volunteers, there's an even bigger group. And then the other thing about these volunteer groups is I think that you have to spend some time on education. And because it's that education that helps sustain the effort as well. So when we've been doing these volunteer groups, and Katrina's assisted in many of them, she's particularly good at doing this, is that always take time to explain what it is we're doing and why we're doing it, why are certain plants being used. Those people that are doing the work take a lot of pride in what they're doing, and they'll come back and do more, and they'll have an interest to see that the work that they've done is successful and develops over the coming years. And then what we've seen is that we've had events, let's say in a particular street, where we've brought a group of volunteers together and they've done something that we organised. They're now, that same group of people are organising their own things and coming back and saying, hey, is it all right if we do this? And we just say, yeah, you go ahead, we can do that. Now, all of this, and it wasn't our intention when we set out, but the more volunteers we use, the less money the parish council's spending as well. So we've done some of the work with contractors, and we've invested in some money in schemes where we've funded some of the plants, perhaps, or we've funded some of the equipment that has to be used, or we've brought a contractor in to do something very specialist. But an awful lot of the work we're getting free of charge because the volunteers come and do it. and the village itself is taking a huge pride in how the village develops and how it looks. And then I think the final thing that I would say in terms of what went well, it's actually a lot of fun doing it. And we've done stuff. You can see pictures here in the summer when the sun's out. There's also pictures of people smiling in the pouring rain. So it doesn't matter what time of the year it is, there's fun to be had doing these kind of activities. So let me just talk then a little bit about, where we found some challenges, and some of these things came up in Jane's conversation as well. But there is a level of necessary documentation. So if people are going to volunteer and do things under the guidance of the Nature Recovery, or it's an event that's organised by the parish council, there are project proposals to fill in, there's insurances to check, and there's the dreaded risk assessment to do. Now, the first time we did it, it was painful, but actually now we've done one or two, it's a lot easier, and we can recycle risk assessments that we've done. So once you've practiced at it, it's okay. You take the time to do it, but it's okay, and you can get it done. We've learned a lot of things about what you can and can't do very easily, and where you can and can't work easily. So we learned a lot in the first exercise that we did around the difficulties of working besides highways, from a permissions, from a health and safety, from the correct insurances point of view. And bear in mind, one of our very first schemes was actually, let's plant something on the roundabouts in the village. If anybody's thinking about roundabouts, my advice would be leave the roundabouts well alone. They're got to be one of the most dangerous spots that you can choose to work in your village, and there's plenty of parish council, county council rules that you have to try and fulfill. We gave up on the roundabouts and moved off to easier areas. Now, about the same time, we started to build relationships with some of the officers for the various organisations that we work in, and that's also valuable. So you can have all sorts of problems if you don't build the relationships, but once you've got the relationships, it can be really helpful with what you're doing. So I'll give you an example. We went out and planted trees on the side of one of the Oxfordshire County Council highways. We weren't supposed to do that without permission. So retrospectively, we went and talked to the tree officer, a guy called Ed, who was actually really helpful. He approved retrospectively the trees that we'd planted, so nothing had to change. But now we have great contact in our tree officer, and if we have any other questions about trees, I can just go to him and ask him questions, and he'll give me the benefit of his experience. I just had to promise no more planting trees right next to his highways without checking with him first. Again, reinforcing some of the things that some of the other speakers have said, there's a tendency for the tidy view from the village to try and overtake those that are trying to develop biodiversity. So a lot of people look at the green areas in the village and think, yeah, this should be all neat and tidy, cut grass, some sort of exotic flowers. If you've pictured the village in bloom thing that was popular some years back. And it takes a while before people understand that actually we need to do things differently. So we've encountered this in trying to do work where people are thinking, well, this just looks a mess. We don't want this mess. It needs to be tidied up. This should be cut. This should be tidied up. This is a weed. We should pull it out. And actually what we're doing is quite the reverse in some cases. So there's a linkage here, and it's the last point on the slide around communication, because I think one of the most important things if you're going to go down this route is to make sure that the village understands what you're doing, and that areas you're working on have not just been left to grow wild because you're trying to save money, but actually it's part of a biodiversity project and we're trying to improve things in the village. Parish council liaison, I think Chris touched on this as well, is a parish council is a very particular sort of organisation, and they're not necessarily user-friendly for many people to deal with. So you have a passionate group of people trying to change a lot of things rapidly in the village meets parish council, and I think part of my role as the sort of nominated parish councillor was to act as that liaison. So to take the requirements of our enthusiastic Nature Recovery team and try and get those through and approved with the parish council without too much stress on either side of the fence. So that was a lot of what my time has been in this organisation. Squeaky wheels and consultation. So Katrina already mentioned squeaky wheels. I've encountered some of them in the village since we started doing this, because people ring up and say, "What are you doing? You can't be doing this. It's terrible. Nobody wants this." And you know, the advice I would give at this point is, there are people that exist that do this. They're very noisy. They believe they represent a much wider part of the village. Don't assume that they're correct. So in some cases, it's about having a conversation, trying to explain what you're doing and bringing people around. But I would say that often those people don't represent the general view in the village, and therefore handle what they're saying with care. And the other one where we've had some challenges is around consultation. So just trying to get an opinion from the village is, should we do this or should we do that? And we've done a few different ways. I think we're getting better. I don't think it's perfect, but again, it kind of links to that last point of communication, which is letting people know that you're looking for ideas of things to do, that you're then going to do a project and this is what it's going to be. And then afterwards, when the project's been executed and the piece of work's been done, publicize that and let people know what you're doing, because the more people you can get interested in this, the more volunteers you can drive to the tasks that you're doing, the better it will go. And I think volunteers, education, engagement of the broad village is the way that this gets to be sustainable.
I think that's fantastic, Ross. Thank you very, very much.
Well, hang on, one more, if I can have 60 seconds. So just the final one, Charles. The advice that I would give anybody starting to think about this is find the experts in your village. They are there. We've got lots in Ensham. I'm sure every other village is the same. Go walk about, go look around your village, look at what you've got and look at what you could improve. Take village meetings, a bit difficult at the moment face to face, but we can do it virtually. Start with the simple stuff. Don't go for the roundabouts. Start with planting wildflowers on a verge away from the roads, and make use of the volunteers. That's been one of the biggest things I've learned here, is just the sheer number of people that will put their time towards making their village a better place to live and a better place for the wildlife. So thank you. There you go, Charles. All done.
We would wish all of us, I think, to thank all the speakers. Such experience. This is so refreshing and food for thought. We do need to work together against the Leviathan of growth and development, so-called progress. Please get on board, whatever category you classify yourself. However, and pushy to promote moderation and create a better future for the flora and fauna of this country. I cannot leave without praising the work of WASP, Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, and Ashley Smith in particular. Please support his diligent intent to prevent our waterways becoming a total cesspit. Our water companies are presently out of control. The Magnificent Meadows project of Cotswold Conservation Board is another example. They have so far restored to species-rich grassland over 100 acres in the last 4 years. That's roughly in an area Bath to Chipping Campden. This is also exciting. Please add to the parish councils and spread all this good work. Together, the biodiversity will return to its coverage of yore. We look forward to seeing you on the 24th of March, if not before. Please use the email admin@nature-recovery-network.org. Your questions will be answered, and I'm sorry that we haven't had the time to deal with them now. Thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you. Well, thank you. That was Neil, I loved your presentation. Thanks. That was really interesting and a
Thank
bit
you.
challenging.
They were all great, weren't they? Very good, very interesting.
Jane, how did it ever? How did you manage? How did Chesham start all that? I'd love to know at some point.
Yeah, a couple of strong personalities, but I mean, it did take a massive kind of change in parish councillors about 6 years ago.
Right. Oh, that's quite inspiring because that's what we had.
I think I'm just going to stop the recording and stop the streaming, but I'll keep the meeting open if you want to keep talking. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of it though is, I mean, the last year, kind of 2 years, there's been a huge shift in residents themselves, and I think I'd like to comment in answer to one of the questions, just the national media and the emphasis now on kind of mainstream channels about climate change and ecology, and you know, Chris Packham, love him as we do. Yes, at least he's bringing it into people's living room. You know, I never thought my husband would sit there watching Autumn, but we've converted.
I thought you were behind
and
us.
that's really moved the agenda along, I think, and it's yes, making some of our more traditional councillors stop and think because they're being held to task by residents, which is the best way